Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
You ever jumped into something with both feet, like full of enthusiasm, only to realize you hadn't quite thought things through?
Oh, definitely. Happens all the time.
Maybe you started that ambitious garden without checking the soil, or agreed to host a huge dinner party before realizing your oven is on the fritz.
Right. Small scale, usually manageable.
But in construction, those kinds of oversights, well, they can have seriously high stakes. That moment of deciding whether to actually go ahead with a project that's our focus today.
That gonna go point.
Exactly. We're diving deep into feasibility, that absolutely critical early stage where an owner determines if their project has a realistic chance of succeeding. Think of it as your fundamental decision point.
And what's interesting here is that a robust feasibility analysis, it moves beyond just wishful thinking, right?
Totally.
It's a systematic way of looking at a project, identifying potential roadblocks, and really exploring, the art of the possible. It's about equipping yourself with the knowledge needed to make a truly informed choice.
Not just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Precisely.
And that decision isn't always a simple yes or no, green light or red light. It might mean moving forward with the core idea, but making significant adjustments.
Right. Maybe tweaking the scope or the timeline.
Revising the schedule, finding smarter ways to manage the budget. Or, sometimes, the wisest decision is to recognize that the project, well, in its current form, it just isn't viable.
Stepping back.
Yeah. And while the owner carries the primary responsibility for this crucial phase, it's rarely a solitary thing. They typically collaborate with a whole range of consultants.
Architects, contractors.
Cost estimators, even marketing specialists, depending on what the project actually is.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see that a thorough feasibility study can be the critical differentiator between a successful project and a really costly mistake.
Oh, absolutely. The sources we looked at highlight this with some pretty compelling examples.
Yeah, they do.
Consider the developer who envisioned this amazing state-of-the-art office building, only to discover after construction that there was virtually no demand for the rental space. Ouch.
Yeah, a huge financial hit. A more insightful look at the local market during that feasibility stage could have saved them. Big time.
It's so easy to get swept up in the vision, isn't it?
It really is.
But a truly insightful feasibility study forces you to confront maybe some uncomfortable truths about demand.
It's not just asking, is there demand, but really digging into the quality and sustainability of that demand.
Good point. Similarly, think about the homeowner who excitedly purchased what seemed like a perfect plot of land for their dream home,
Right, the dream spot.
only to find out that a significant chunk was protected wetlands, and the zoning didn't even allow for residential development.
Wow. Talk about a dream turned into a soggy, expensive mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These scenarios just underscore why a comprehensive feasibility review is absolutely essential. And according to our sources, there are sort of 6 broad categories that an owner needs to really investigate.
Okay, so this raises an important question. What are these fundamental areas that dictate a project's viability?
What do we need to look at?
Our material outlines 6 key issues. First, a comprehensive needs assessment. Second, a meticulous process of site selection.
Okay.
Third, a realistic and detailed evaluation of financial feasibility. Fourth, a clear understanding of schedule feasibility.
Right.
Fifth, navigating the often intricate world of regulatory requirements, zoning, building codes, all that. And finally, considering the influence of community values.
And the depth you go into for each of these, that obviously depends on the project, right? Big project, deep dive. Small project, maybe less intense.
Exactly. Scale and complexity are key.
Okay, let's dive into that first one then. Needs assessment. At its core, this is about clearly defining the why behind the whole project.
What specific problem are we trying to solve? What overarching goal are we aiming to achieve?
Yeah, just like checking if that wall's really load-bearing before you swing the sledgehammer.
Good analogy.
The needs assessment is about ensuring the fundamental why of your project is actually sound.
Precisely. For a homeowner, like we've seen, this can be relatively straightforward, like figuring out if converting that unused garage into a family room will genuinely better serve their family's needs as they change.
Makes sense.
But for larger speculative ventures, those projects started without a specific end user already lined up. The needs assessment becomes way more complex and, frankly, critical.
So for these bigger projects, what are the crucial questions an owner needs to be asking themselves right from the start?
Well, the sources emphasize several vital inquiries. First, What are the genuine needs of the local market? Is there a real demonstrable demand for this type of project?
And are those needs currently being met?
Exactly. Are they currently being adequately met by what's already out there? If the market is already saturated, the risk of being left with unsold condos or unrented office space just shoots way up.
Okay, market need. What else?
Second, who are the likely potential users? Having a clear picture of your target demographic is fundamental. You have to create something that actually resonates with them.
Right, like that example of the apartment building with only one-bedroom units.
In a neighborhood full of young families needing 2 or 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, that perfectly illustrates the pitfalls of not accurately identifying who you're building for.
Total mismatch.
That makes perfect sense. Build with your audience in mind. What other key factors should owners be considering during this needs assessment phase?
They also need to carefully evaluate the services and amenities that are going to be necessary to stay competitive in that specific market.
Like what?
Well, for instance, an upscale office building might need things like a well-equipped fitness center or large, flexible conference spaces to attract and keep the tenants they want.
Gotcha. Keeping up with expectations.
And finally, the big one, the fundamental question that underpins everything. Do the financial projections actually work? Is there a realistic potential for profit?
And is the initial budget truly aligned with the owner's goals and, the market realities?
Exactly. Does it make financial sense at the end of the day?
Right. So once you've established why you want to build, the next logical step.
They really can. They're basically legal rights allowing someone else to use part of your property for something specific, like utility lines running across it or a shared driveway.
So you need to know about those up front.
Absolutely, because they can impact what and where you can build. Then there's the overall size and shape of the property, and of course, those incredibly important regulatory things.
That is zoning again.
Zoning ordinances, building codes, environmental regulations, all tied to the specific site.
Wow, it sounds like evaluating a potential site requires a pretty diverse set of skills. You need to think like a geographer, an engineer.
And maybe even a bit like a lawyer, yeah.
Ah, right.
And ultimately, the owner has to find a balance between the initial cost, buying the land, developing it, and its long-term potential for the intended use.
That example of the housing developer, that really hits home.
Yeah, the one who finds they just can't build homes at a price point the local market will actually support.
But that same piece of land might work for something else.
Exactly. It might be perfectly viable for a different type of project, maybe commercial or even housing, but at a different scale or density. It's all about the fit.
Okay, so we've considered the need for the project and a potential location. Now we come to the part that often keeps people awake at night. The money.
The financial aspects,
Yep.
yep. This is where financial feasibility comes into play.
Talk us through that.
Exactly. The core questions here really revolve around the total anticipated cost of the project.
How much is this whole thing going to cost?
Right. And then does the owner actually have the financial capacity to do it? Can they afford it?
Where's the money coming from?
Precisely. Funding sources. And what's the level of financial risk involved in this whole undertaking?
And, of course, the bottom line. Potential for profit, or at least breaking even, depending on the goal.
Potential for generating a satisfactory return on that initial investment. Absolutely.
And at this very early stage, how does an owner even begin to grapple with these huge financial questions? It seems daunting.
Well, during the feasibility phase, the owner will develop what's called an outline budget.
An outline budget.
This involves a preliminary assessment of all the anticipated costs tied to the project. You're also identifying potential sources of funding, maybe bank loans, maybe investor capital.
And guessing future income.
Creating initial projections of future revenues or income, yeah. And this isn't just for the owner's own planning, lenders. They're going to require comprehensive financial projections before they even think about committing any financing.
Makes sense.
Right.
Our source mentioned something called conceptual estimates. What exactly are those? Are they part of this outline budget?
Yeah, they often feed into it. Conceptual estimates are basically rough order of magnitude cost estimates. They're developed super early in the project lifecycle when you only have minimal detailed design information.
So like back of the envelope calculations.
Kind of, but a bit more structured. These estimates might be based on a general cost per square foot for similar types of construction in that area, along with some preliminary allowances for any specific upgrades or features, the owner's thinking about maybe integrating solar heating, adding fireplaces, specifying high-end tiles, that sort of thing.
But they're rough, right?
Oh yeah. Keep in mind, these are broad strokes. You might be looking at a plus or minus 15–20% accuracy at this point.
So not exact science yet.
Not at all. The real value is in identifying the major budget buckets early on and understanding what might drive costs up.
And maybe putting aside some contingency funds.
This is absolutely where you start thinking about contingency, and Chapter 11 of our source material actually dives deeper into where you can get these initial cost figures from.
Good to know.
Ah.
And it's crucial to remember that even for smaller homeowner projects, this basic financial planning, figuring out the overall cost and how you'll pay for it, is absolutely essential.
Oh, definitely. You don't want to start knocking down walls without a clear plan for how you're going to pay to rebuild them. Seems obvious, but...
Right. Easy to get carried away. Okay, now let's shift gears slightly and talk about time. Some projects operate under really strict deadlines, and that brings us to the concept of schedule feasibility.
That's correct. Projects with immovable deadlines, think about a school that absolutely needs to be ready for the start of the academic year.
Or a ski resort trying to open by the first big snowfall.
Exactly. Or even just a homeowner coordinating their move-in date with the end of a lease. These all have significant schedule constraints built right in.
And these constraints can actually impact whether the project is feasible overall.
They absolutely can. In some cases, the required timeline might just be too tight to realistically achieve, making the project unfeasible from the get-go.
How so? It seems like it's just about making sure you can finish construction by a specific date, right?
Well, it's actually more interconnected than that. Schedule feasibility is very, very closely linked to financial feasibility.
Ah, okay. How does that work?
The projected duration of construction directly influences various costs. For example, if your initial feasibility study shows that the project's scope will likely push the construction timeline into the winter months,
Right, bad weather.
that can lead to extra expenses for temporary weather protection, maybe heated enclosures, and potentially lower worker productivity because of the cold or wet conditions. All of that drives up the total project cost.
Ah, I see. So in the world of construction, time really does equal money in more ways than one.
Precisely. And our source highlights another critical financial implication of project duration: the cost of borrowing money.
Interest payments.
Exactly. Interest on construction loans accrues over time. So a longer construction schedule translates directly to the owner paying interest for a longer period.
Which adds up.
For large-scale projects, this can accumulate to millions of dollars in additional interest expenses alone. It's a huge factor.
Wow, that really underscores the importance of realistic and efficient scheduling. Okay, we've explored needs, site, finances, and time. Next on our list is the often complex and crucial area of regulatory requirements.
Yes, this is an absolutely vital aspect. Here, an owner has to figure out if the proposed project is even permissible under the local zoning regulations.
What you're allowed to build there.
Right. And also, if there are any significant building code requirements that could substantially impact the project's cost and design. Let's break these down, maybe starting with zoning.
Okay, zoning. It's a term we hear all the time. What's the fundamental purpose behind zoning regulations?
At its core, zoning is a system used by most local governments to regulate how land within their jurisdiction can be used and developed.
Okay.
The main goal is usually to separate land uses that are considered incompatible.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't want a heavy industrial plant right next to a quiet residential neighborhood.
Right, makes sense.
And also to prevent new development from having really detrimental effects on existing residents and businesses.
So it's basically a tool for managing urban development and trying to prevent land use conflicts. But our source also mentions community concerns in the context of zoning. How do these regulations tackle those broader issues?
Well, new developments can profoundly change the existing character of a neighborhood, right?
Sure.
They might involve demolishing older buildings, bringing in different architectural styles, establishing new types of businesses or activities.
More traffic, noise.
Exactly. Increased traffic, noise levels, impacts on air and water quality, even shadows cast by new buildings, plus effects on local housing affordability and the viability of existing local businesses.
A lot to consider.
Zoning regulations serve as a mechanism to try and manage these potential impacts, but they can also be used strategically to encourage specific types of revitalization and growth within a community.
So it's often a delicate balancing act. Progress versus preservation.
Very much so. Imagine getting all your kitchen plans approved only to find your neighbors are, like, vehemently opposed to your modern design in a historic neighborhood. That's the real-world impact of maybe neglecting community values, which can sometimes get reflected in zoning or related reviews.
And it sounds like zoning isn't some standardized system across the board. It varies.
Absolutely not. Zoning regulations can differ quite significantly from one state to another, and even between neighboring towns or cities.
Wow.
Our source uses California as a good practical example. In California, every city and county is legally required to develop a comprehensive general plan.
A general plan.
Yeah, it outlines broad policy goals for things like land use, transportation infrastructure, housing, conservation. This big picture general plan then serves as the guide for creating specific zoning districts through a zoning ordinance.
And that ordinance has.
It typically consists of two key parts: a zoning map and the written zoning ordinance itself.
Okay, so let's make this more concrete. How does this play out in a specific place? You mentioned California.
Right, so the zoning map visually shows you the boundaries of different zones.
Like a color-coded map.
Often, yeah, or using abbreviations. It visually identifies the designated allowable uses for every piece of land within that zoning district. Think of the example from Sebastopol, California. They use different shading and abbreviations like RSF for residential single family,
Okay.
CG for general commercial, OLI for office and light industrial. The crucial point is that certain land uses are simply prohibited in specific zones.
So you generally can't build a house in a commercial zone.
Right, or typically open a big fast food place in a zone meant only for single-family homes. So the very first step for any owner is to accurately locate their proposed site on the relevant zoning map for that town or city.
Okay, so once you found your property on the zoning map, what's the next step in navigating this regulatory landscape?
The next step is to thoroughly review the written zoning ordinance. This is the detailed legal document.
The fine print.
Kind of, yeah. It provides the specific rules and regulations that govern what uses are permitted within each zoning designation. It also includes any supplementary restrictions that might apply, things like limits on building height, minimum lot sizes, parking requirements, setbacks from property lines.
Lots of details.
A lot. Let's revisit our hypothetical homeowner in Sebastopol. They want to build a new house and also run a small daycare on their property, which is zoned RSF2.
Yeah.
First, they'd confirm that RSF2 designation on the map. Then, they'd need to carefully check the written ordinance to see if a small-scale daycare is an allowed use, or maybe a conditionally permitted use, within that RSF2 zone.
And in that specific example.
In that particular example provided in our source material, it actually is allowed, maybe with certain conditions.
Got it. So zoning primarily dictates what you can legally do with the land. Now let's move on to building codes. What's their main focus? Zoning tells you what you can build. Building codes tell you how.
That's a great way to put it. Building codes serve a distinct but equally critical purpose. They are a set of local regulations focused primarily on promoting safe design and construction practices.
Safety first.
Exactly. Ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of the public who will occupy or interact with buildings and their surroundings. Historically, building codes actually started mostly with fire prevention.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, fire safety regulations. But their scope has expanded way beyond that over time to address a whole range of potential hazards, structural integrity for earthquakes, hurricanes,
Right.
and also public welfare issues like sanitation, proper ventilation, sufficient lighting, accessibility.
So building codes are more concerned with the technical nitty-gritty of how a structure is built, kind of regardless of its intended use.
Generally speaking, yeah. They cover a huge array of technical specs: minimum ceiling heights, required structural load capacities, the width of stairways, number and placement of emergency exits, you name it.
Sounds incredibly detailed. Do local towns write these themselves?
Interestingly, most don't develop their building codes entirely from scratch. They typically adopt and then adapt model codes.
Model codes.
Yeah, these are developed and published by organizations like the International Code Council, the ICC, or the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. Local governments adopt these models, but often with amendments to tailor them to specific local needs or conditions, like maybe higher snow load requirements in mountain areas.
Okay, so they adapt them. And are these building codes actually enforced?
Oh, absolutely. Usually through the local city or county building department, inspectors come out at various stages.
Right.
And just like zoning, building code requirements can vary significantly depending on the building's intended use or occupancy.
Like a house versus a school.
Exactly. A single-family home has different requirements than a school or a high-rise office. It also depends on its geographic location. Think seismic zones or hurricane zones and the specific type of construction being used.
So the rules in, say, Tucson might be different from Golden, Colorado, or Detroit.
Definitely. Different climate, different risks.
Our source also brings up energy codes. That sounds like a more recent development.
It is indeed. With a growing awareness of sustainable building practices, energy codes have become a really important focus area.
What do they cover?
They specifically address the energy efficiency of buildings. They promote things like using high-performance building materials, energy-efficient appliances and windows, optimize heating and cooling systems.
And are these mandatory?
Many cities and states have now adopted mandatory energy codes, and California actually holds the distinction of being the first state in the U.S. to implement a mandatory green building code called CalGreen.
Cal Green. Okay. Does this add cost?
Well, while these energy codes are great for promoting environmental sustainability and lowering long-term operating costs, it's important to note that stricter energy efficiency requirements can sometimes lead to an increase in upfront construction costs.
Because you need better insulation, maybe more efficient HVAC systems.
Exactly. Enhanced insulation, more efficient systems, maybe specialized windows, those things can cost more initially.
So it's yet another factor owners need to consider and potentially budget for early on.
Precisely. And the source wisely advises that for projects involving unusual or innovative construction techniques like, say, building a straw bale house,
Right, not your typical build.
it's really prudent to have early discussions with the local building officials, proactively identify any potential regulatory hurdles or specific code interpretations that might apply before you get too far down the road.
So talk to the building department early if you're doing something different.
Definitely. While the super detailed code analysis usually happens during the formal design phase, owners should have a general awareness early on of any major building code requirements that could significantly impact their project's feasibility and cost.
And it sounds like zoning and building codes aren't the only regulatory hurdles an owner might face, right? There could be others.
Oh, yes. Depending on the project's nature and location, there can be a whole array of other regulatory requirements to navigate.
Like what else?
You might need approvals or permits from local or state health departments, fire departments, transportation agencies,
Okay.
plus laws and requirements related to public utilities like water and sewer connections, and various environmental quality regulations, wetlands, air quality, things like that.
And historic districts, too.
Absolutely. If a project is located within a designated historic district, there are often additional layers of review and approval processes required to make sure the new construction or renovation is sensitive to the area's historical character.
Okay, wow. We've navigated through the often complex world of regulations. That brings us to the final of the 6 broad issues we're exploring: community values. This seems a bit less tangible than zoning maps and building codes.
That's a valid observation. It feels softer, maybe, but it's no less critical to the overall success of a project.
Okay.
This final stage involves proactively investigating any potential political or community-based issues that could pop up in response to the proposed development.
So even if you follow all the rules,
Exactly. Even if a project technically meets all the zoning regulations and building code requirements, it can still end up being controversial within the local community.
and why should a project owner be concerned about community opinions if they've meticulously followed all the official rules and regulations? Why does that matter?
Because significant community opposition can lead to really substantial delays in the permitting process.
Delays cause money.
They sure do. It can also lead to unexpected increases in project costs, maybe due to added requirements forced by the opposition or legal challenges. And in some unfortunate cases, strong enough opposition can even lead to the project being abandoned altogether.
Wow. So it can actually kill the project.
It absolutely can. The source gives the example of a developer wanting to subdivide a large piece of land. Even if the zoning allows it, the city might have to hold a public hearing and get approval from the planning commission.
And that's where neighbors can speak up.
That's the door opening for neighboring property owners and community groups to voice their concerns and potentially raise objections.
And what kinds of objections might these community members typically raise? What do people usually worry about?
Objections can range widely. Concerns about increased traffic congestion, noise pollution.
Okay, the practical impacts.
Right. Worries about the project's potential impact on the existing character of the neighborhood. And you might also encounter what's often called the not in my backyard or NMB attitude.
NIMBism.
Yeah, like the example of a proposed halfway house facing strong local resistance. Even if it meets all legal requirements, People might just not want it there.
So it's crucial for owners to try and gauge potential community reactions early in the feasibility process.
Yes, and be prepared for possible delays and added expenses if significant opposition seems likely or starts to emerge. You might need to do more community outreach, maybe adjust the design.
So a truly successful project isn't just about ticking all the boxes on permits and financial spreadsheets.
Not at all.
It's also about understanding
Yeah.
and, where you can, addressing the concerns and values of the surrounding community.
Precisely. A comprehensive feasibility review, often called doing your due diligence, is fundamentally about gaining a thorough understanding of the entire spectrum of potential challenges and opportunities tied to a project.
Getting the full picture.
Exactly. This holistic understanding empowers owners to make well-informed and ultimately wiser decisions about how or even whether to proceed.
And those decisions, as we discussed right at the start, could range from moving forward with the original plan,
Grease light.
making necessary adjustments to the project's scope, timeline, or budget based on what you found out during feasibility,
Course correction.
or even making that difficult but sometimes prudent decision to abandon the project altogether.
Pulling the plug.
Yeah, if the identified risks or costs just prove to be too high, or the market demand isn't really there, or maybe that anticipated community resistance looks too significant to overcome.
And it's also important to remember, as our source points out, that contractors themselves do a similar, though usually less expensive, feasibility check when they're deciding whether to even bid on a job.
Oh, interesting. From their perspective, too.
Yeah, they might evaluate things like the project's geographic distance. Is it too far from their base? Do they have crews available?
Does it require special skill?
Exactly. Does the project require specialized skills or equipment they don't have? Or is the proposed construction timeline realistic given their current workload and resources?
So feasibility isn't just a one-time owner concern. It's really a fundamental part of making sound decisions all the way through the construction process for multiple parties.
Absolutely. It's ongoing evaluation, really.
And if an owner does decide to move forward after this thorough deep dive into feasibility, well, there's a whole new set of crucial decisions waiting for them, isn't there?
Oh, yes. The feasibility is just the start in many ways.
Like figuring out the best way to actually bring the project to life.
Absolutely. Once the decision is made to proceed, the owner faces major choices. Selecting a designer, selecting a contractor. How do you form the broader project team?
And how do you hire the contractor? Bidding versus negotiation.
Exactly. Do you use a competitive bidding process or maybe a negotiated contract? These key choices ultimately define what's called the project delivery method.
Project delivery method.
And that's an entirely other fascinating and complex area. Definitely something we can explore in future discussions.
Sounds like a plan.
Oh.
Okay, so as you, our listener, go about your day, whether you're maybe contemplating a small home renovation or perhaps even a much larger undertaking, take a moment to reflect on these critical feasibility factors we've discussed today.
Needs, site, money, time, rules, community.
Yeah, which of these elements do you think would be the most critical to the success of your particular project, whatever it might be?
It's a valuable exercise.
It really is. It's a valuable reminder that investing just a little time and effort in upfront planning and analysis, doing that feasibility work, can save you from significant headaches and potentially serious financial setbacks down the line.